All right, so today we are on session 10. So session 10 includes different testing types. So at first, we'll kind of talk about different classes of testing. So class means what? Class means different category of testing. So we will go over them. There are structural testing, functional, and non-functional. So most of those bullet points we have here are more like theoretical. You just need to know for your theory. Nothing will be like, very inclusive in your job. In your job, you don't have to do a lot of things. It's just kind of theoretical knowledge. So classes of testing will go over. Types, there are many types. So we talk about doing testing, right? But there are so many different techniques. I mean, you can test in different ways. So we'll kind of go over different types of testing. Unit testing, you guys already know what is unit testing, so I may not have to talk about that. Then integration, smoke testing, I kind of said that other day. Positive, negative, boundary, system testing, regression, load, volume, stress, performance, front end. So you have to understand a little bit of what those testing are. But if you are not sure about how to perform this test, that's okay, because at the end, once you get into the job, then you probably able to figure out. Like right now, you just have to know what is that testing is, you know, because it is so hard without really working on something to know what kind of testing is like. But you just have to have some basic idea. So basic idea means you need to know how those testing can be done, but you don't need to know all those details. So I'll kind of go over that in a moment. And we have some homework question. So software testing technique. So the first category is structural test, right? So this is the name. So if you just understand the highlighted portion, is saying it is the internal code. So what is code? Code is what? Java, C++, then C Sharp. Those are different types of programming language, right?
Right.
So those programming language can be called as code. The structural test, you need to have idea or you need to understand what those codes are. To do that, you have to be a good programmer. So if you're a programmer, if you know some of those programming language, you can able to perform this test. Does it make sense?
So this one is a unit. I mean, this test is unit testing, or
It's more like, it's not really unit testing, it's more like types of testing category. If you know, so let's say you have 25 different types of testing, right? So one type require you to know some sort of programming language. So one type of testing, you need to have some sort of knowledge for programming language. So if you have some knowledge of programming language, maybe you can pick that type of testing, right?
okay.
So I'm talking about the category. So you can probably pick that category of testing. So that's what it is about. It's called is the internal code. So if you know the programming language, you can able to test that type of testing. So this is validate system architecture structural testing. So what does it mean? So when you perform this test, so once you understand how this code is written, you can able to say whether it is written correctly or not. So for example, if you, so let's kind of go back to the example of car. So if you know how the car is built, if you know all those internal mechanism, like whether the carburetor or whether the engine, whatever they install is installed properly or how it is function, if you know every single thing, what is in the car, how it is function, you probably can able to test every single piece, right?
Right.
Because you have more knowledge about it. So once you have that much knowledge and once you use those knowledge to perform those type of testing, is called structural testing. Make sense?
Yes.
So it's also considered white box testing. So I'm gonna go through that white box. What does it mean? In fact, today I asked a bunch of candidates with this question: what is white box testing? Only few people was able to answer that. So if you know what is that testing technique, it's much easier. But I'll kind of cover that later. Um, so structural testing, for your knowledge, you have to know structural testing, also called white box testing,
Okay.
because it has to do with the internal logic or code, right? Once you have to deal with the internal code or logic, is structural testing or white box testing. So both are almost same. Structural testing and white box are 80 or 95% same. They just kind of call it differently, you know. So because the knowledge of the internal logic of the system is used to develop the test case, because in this technique, if you follow this technique, what are you gonna do? You have to go to the application. So for example, if you're working on any web application, right? There's some programming language behind it, correct? So
Um,
if you are knowledgeable about programming language, you can go to that programming language and you can able to read the language and come up with your test case, or you can write the test case. So what does it mean? So let me kind of go back and you can able to um, say. So for example, if you're in, let's say this is like web-based application, right? So if I just go to the, let me see if I can open up. I think it's gonna be easier if I just open Edge Chrome. Okay, there you go. So, so some of them, I mean, they're like bunch of elements, class. Those are HTML tag, right? So HTML is another type of programming language. So to do this test, you need to able to read how those programming language is written, right? You need to know what is the definition of style, what is the definition of class, how those are kind of related, and what happens when you click on something. So when you perform this, or when you have the idea of the code itself, and then when you're able to perform this testing, is called structural testing. This is very sophisticated, or this is very complicated testing, because in this way you have to have some knowledge of programming language. But
This
most
is
of the,
expert, right? Expert.
so you're talking about Selenium. So it's kind of expert. There's so many different variable in Selenium, you can kind of call that. But expert, if I'm not mistaken, is basically the the URL that particular
Mm-hmm.
application is uses. But in this case, it's not just URL itself, it's more about like, different type of like, element, or different type of object,
Object.
different type of object it is doing. So that's what it is in here. But don't get nervous, this is very sophisticated one, you may not have to do that in your real world, but for your interview, you need to have you need to understand what does that mean. Make sense?
yes.
And functional test, this is where you're going to spend all of your time. And this thing does not require you to know the programming language. You don't need to know anything about the programming language. Only thing you care about the requirement and what you'd be expecting after you do certain action, right? That's what you're gonna do most of the time, functional testing. And the highlighted portion is input action as I expected for output. So remember we talk about test case. So test case has actual result, expected result, step description and all. So for this type of testing, you would know what you'll be expecting after you perform certain action, right? For example, if you go to facebook.com, if you put your username and password, once you click enter, you would know that whether way is going to be successful or unsuccessful, right? Based on the requirement. If the requirement say the username would be the email only, so if you just put email, you would expect that it will give you it will give you like, successful login page or successful page login stuff. So when you perform this type of testing, it's all about based on the requirement. Once you know what requirement this particular test is about, and once you know how to test that requirement, and based on that information you are writing your test case, if you follow that type of process, it's called functional testing or functional test. So input action as I expected for output. So you guys understand what that means, right? Input. So based on your document, based on BRD SRS, you will be creating the test case, and there will have actual result and expected results, right? Tests that validate system are called functional testing. So based on this information, you'll be performing test, which is test execution, right? In the last session, we kind of go over test execution. That means based on those steps, once you follow it, once you make sure that whatever you wrote in the test case are matching what it is in the actual result, that type of work is called functional test. Make sense? This testing address the overall behavior of the program by testing transaction flows, input validation, functional completeness, but no knowledge of internal logic. So what I'm saying, you don't have to know about the programming language. Only thing you need to know about flows. These flows will come from business requirement document or the use case. Transaction flows, it probably can come from use case document. Input validation, it probably can come from system SRS, system requirement specification. And functional completeness, this something probably can come from either BRD or SRS. So those are three type of information you probably can get from three different documents, right? Basically what is happening, based on those three different type of information, you will be doing the testing, because you already know what you'd be expecting, and you already know how to get to that point to make this test, right? So when you follow this type of steps, or this type of methodology, or this type of activity, is called functional testing. Make sense? One is internal code, one is based on BRD, SRS, and use case document. So those are the two different things. So for this one, you don't care about looking at the requirement document. Okay? Why? Because you'll be looking at the code.
Right.
But this one, you need to know the requirement document, because there's no way you can see the code, or you have no knowledge about how the code is working. But based on the requirement document, you will know how it should work. Correct?
Jivan, can you please tell us something about the white box testing and black box a little bit, so we can, memorize with this.
So yes, for now, just hold your question, because there is another topic, white box and black box, which is somewhere here. I think it's in the next session.
Okay.
But white box testing is basically testing with the internal code. Okay, when you test something based on the internal logic, like for example the stuff which I showed you here. So if you test something based on this, so if you kind of know that once you click this particular code, it should do something, right? Once you know this information by looking at the code, and based on that you design your test case. For example, by looking at the code, if you see that, okay, once I click something here, it would just highlight or something, right? By reading the code, that's something you probably kind of understand. Now what you have to do, you have to go back to your test case, and you're going to write your test case, because you already kind of see the codes showing that once you click something, that's what it should appear, or that's what it should do. So once you follow this type of steps, or this type of instruction, that called white box testing. Does it make sense?
Yes.
It's very complicated, because not all the QA analysts would know the programming language, so that's fine. You don't have to know the white box testing, but for your definition, you have to say for white box testing require to have internal code knowledge.
Okay.
Any question, Bobby? You got it?
Mm. Can you explain again a little bit?
Okay. So you know what is code, right? Code.
Mm.
So think that way. This is a code, right? So in white box testing, what is happening? You open up the code like that, the way I'm showing you right now. You open
Mm.
up the code and you're gonna read the code like that. Okay, when I click this, it should show this. I mean, because I'm assuming you already know the code, right? You
Yeah,
already know how
yeah.
to read the code. That's what I'm assuming. So, but now you are kind of go through that and you're gonna say, okay, so look like when I click this one here, it should show some different margin or different category or different like element it should show, like once you
Mm.
click something. So now you already see the code, right? So now what are you gonna do? You're gonna go back to the test case. Then you're gonna type step one is like click X, then go this, then I mean you're gonna write those steps one by one because now you know what the application should do because by reading the code you already know once you come to that point, like once you come to this point, once you click on something, once you click on any option or any object or something, it should give you some sort of like error message or maybe some sort of like window should open or something. It could do something else, right?
Mm.
Because you get this information by reading the code. Make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Don't worry about it. How you're gonna do that in the real work because that's something you guys not gonna do. It's just for your theory. By knowing the internal code, how the code is working, based on that, you write your test case because you already know when you come to this point, it should have like it should have some sort of like comment or it should have some sort of like border appear like that. Something happened.
Mm-hmm.
So now what you are doing, you are going back to your test case, going back to the test case and you are writing, okay, first is log into the page because when you start, first is log into the page. Maybe for example, now you're going to click on like, sign up. Now you're going to do this. So you already know what the code is doing. And based on that, you are writing those steps. So when you write those test case based on the code, how it is written, is called white box testing. Is it clear now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So Ali, I think you already understand. So maybe in the group study, try to help Bobby and Shobuz Bhai. So that way you guys can help each other.
To help what? Make them
The
understand
white
coding.
box testing. I
Oh,
mean,
oh, I'm sorry.
a definition. You don't need to tell everybody like how this is being done, the code is working. You don't have to say anything, but just the theory, like what is
Okay,
white box based on the code. That's what is happening. You have to go back and write your test case based on how the code is written. That's what you have to kind of explain.
okay, bye.
All right. So next is non-functional test. So one is structure, which is based on the code.
Mhm.
Another is what? Based on your requirement, input,
Wait,
exception, and all those different documents. And another is just based on your system characteristic. So think that way. I mean, every system has some limitation, has some capability. Okay. So you are kind of testing system capability or system like whether able to handle the pressure, right? So think about it. So you guys are talking about applying for unemployment or something, but now you guys are not able to apply because there's so many people are logging into the application or website, and now the whole website is kind of hung, right? It's kind of crashed. So it's not able to like process anything. The reason it's not able to process because the system architecture or there is some sort of like limitation in the system which only can allow 100 users can log in the same time. So if there is more than 100 users is logging, then probably system is not working because it cannot able to process that many people in the same time.
bye.
That's so those
Yes.
type of testing is called non-functional. It doesn't have to do anything. The requirement is about system robustness or system capability or performance, whether the system can able to perform under like very stressed type of situation. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So this again, you may not have to do anything here if you are if you are a load test engineer, or if you are a, a low volume tester or something like that, different role, you may have to know this, because that one is basically talking about how can you ensure that the system can able to perform properly when there are lot of people trying to log in, or when there are thousands or thousands of transactions being performed, so those type of thing you have to check. But in your current role, whatever role you are going for, you may not have to do anything. Your 80 or 90% work will be in here, but for your interview purpose, you have to know what is that non-functional test. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Mm.
So what is the test that validates system characteristics such as performance, stability? You know what is stability, right? Stability means whether it can able to handle.
Mm.
Maintainability, usability, and security. Security means whether this website is secure, right? So if
Right.
somebody build a website and the code is actually showing the whatever password his user is putting in, the code is kind of written in a bad way, so now everybody can read people's password, there is some sort of security issue there, correct? So you
Mm.
have to make sure that everything is everything is kind of secure, and there's nothing getting compromised or something. So when you check those type of behavior of the system, that's called non-functional test. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Usability is how user friendly is that. So if I
Yeah.
tell you to go to Facebook and just try to log in, but if somebody build a website in a way that you cannot find the username and password field, it's not user friendly, right? That guy
Mm.
probably designed that website poorly. So that's what the usability is. Maintainability is whether way the application is easy to maintain. You remember the maintenance phase in software development lifecycle. So maintenance phase kind of talk about whether the software can able to, or the software is easy to maintain. Means if something happened in the software or application, can it can it take it down and they can able to fix it quickly and put it back. How easy that thing can be, how easy it is for the developer or maybe other people to fix something. That's called the maintainability. Make sense?
Yes.
Performance is performance, right? Whether it is
Yeah.
performed. So the example I gave you, whatever example I just said, if somebody is trying to log into a particular website, but the website cannot handle that um, user because there are already thousands of people already logged into that same website. When this thing happen, that means there is some sort of performance issue,
Mm.
because the website is created in a that way it only can able to handle thousands user, not more than that.
Right.
So that kind of thing is called non-functional test. Is it clear now?
Yes.
Structural, functional, non-functional, all are definition. Don't worry about how to do that in the real job function. That's something I'll kind of show you in the later part of the course.
Okay.
So now let's move on. So this is category, right?
Mhm.
So those are categories. So at first you have parent, then child, right? If you think about structure, if you think about how the tree is, first is parent, then the child, right? So
Mhm.
category, think that as a parent. So under those three category, there are a bunch of different child. Okay.
Right. Mhm.
So and most of the stuff here, I mean, it kind of broken down into different category, but for your interview you don't have to tell it, you don't have to say which category each of those testing types gonna fall into. You don't have to say that, but you need to know for your own understanding
Mm.
what is that types gonna fall into what category.
Mm.
So unit testing, do I have to explain what is unit testing? Because it's
Yeah.
very simple. So which category is gonna fall?
The first one, the structural test.
Yes, and because why? Because it has to deal with the code.
Do code, yes.
Pabi, you got it?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I'm not gonna explain the unit testing because it's very initial level of testing. It's just checking
Yeah.
the internal code. Integration testing. So this is going to be fall into the second one, which is functional testing category. This
Mhm,
category. Because
mhm,
in this one, you're gonna check whatever developer created. So if the developer created two pieces of code, right? You have to make sure that when those two pieces of code combine together,
mhm,
whether way they are working properly or not. Another good example is that is, so for example, if one developer work on that home module and another developer work on the course module,
mhm,
once those two module put together, you need to make sure that when the home option is clicked, the course module is also visible, or there is no any impact.
mhm.
They shouldn't have any impact, right?
Right.
Mhm.
When you do those type of check, is called integration testing.
Mhm,
Okay, so in the real world it can be pieces of code, or it can be two different function or feature. They're probably gonna make sure that whenever two feature is put together, both features should work perfectly. That's something you have to make sure.
It's always two or more.
More than two. So two is just an example. It can be two, three, four, five, doesn't matter. It can be many, right?
mhm,
So you have to make sure when they combine everything, when they put together everything, all has to work perfectly.
mhm,
Mhm.
So look at that. It is a test to check whether all the modules, so modules, whatever I just showed you now, are combined together or not and working successfully as specified in the requirement document. So when they put together, we have to make sure whether they actually working correctly based on requirement document. Got it? Requirement document
Mhm.
is any of those, BRD, SRS, or use case.
This is right.
Just for your information, each developer works on different, look, whatever I just said, each developer works on different module. When they finish their code, the configuration management team, so configuration management team, basically the person who set up the environment.
Mhm,
Remember we talked about environment setup.
right.
This another
Mhm.
team kind of make sure they put them together and create a build, and then they deploy that to our environment, which is system integration environment, right? So
Mhm,
when those people work together, uh, and then they deploy those changes or codes to our QA environment, then we start testing them, right? Then we make sure that all those four, five, or multiple modules, they're working correctly or perfectly. That's what you have to make sure,
mhm.
and they're working as per requirement. Make sense?
Yes.
Mhm.
Smoke testing, again, I think I said a little bit in last session, is initial testing, right?
Mhm,
It's make sure that whether the system is able to handle more load, right? So
mhm,
if you think that system cannot take more than one user at a time, that means the system is not ready. So for example, Facebook, so if you know that Facebook only can accept one user at a time but not many user, then you can say that it's not ready for your testing because it only can take one user. Make sense? Because this is just an example. You just make sure that whether it is able to handle further testing or more load. That's what it is talking about, the smoke testing. So it's basically checking the system stability. Stability means whether it is stable, whether it is formed, how well the system performs. With this approach, QA analysts will look at the major functions of the system by creating a checklist. Example, creating a checklist to see if you can click on different option on the web page. The good example is, let's say, those configuration management team, they put together all the modules, they deployed that change to the QA environment. Now you have to perform the system testing. So the system testing would be like, I'm sorry, the smoke testing would be like, coming here, you're gonna click on that, right? You're gonna click on this. When you click on that, you are expecting you can able to navigate to there, right? Simple. But
Mhm.
for some reason, once you click on that and it does not open, or if it takes long time to open, then it failed in your smoke testing, because in your initial testing it look like the website is not ready for you to test, right? So it's just basically making sure that it is ready, looks good, and it can able to handle your further testing. That's what it is making sure. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And those highlighted one are very crucial ones, so that's why I'm highlighting them. So the next one is called positive testing. So positive testing, let's kind of go back. When for example, let's kind of talk about the search option here. So positive testing is to make sure when you test something based on the requirement. So
Mm.
if the requirements say you only can able to type number here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and if you just put the number in and test that whether the search option is working or not, it's called positive testing.
Right.
Based on the requirement, if the requirement say you only need to put numbers, not letters, not special characters, no nothing, just the number. When you test something with just valid input based on the requirement, it called positive testing. Make sense?
Mhm.
Mm.
Okay. So
Yes,
what is
basically.
so testing with the valid data means whatever requirement said. It called happy path testing. So sometimes they gonna call, can you tell me what is happy path testing? In the interview they can say it. So happy path testing is basically with the same thing with the positive testing. Okay.
It's just follow the requirement. That's
Yeah.
all about it, right?
Just follow the requirement by using the valid data. Make sure you have
Okay.
to mention about the valid data, because that's what you are gonna use. So negative testing is opposite. So you're gonna test based on invalid data, and it's not going to be based on the requirement. And you are trying to break the system, right? It also called break testing.
Mm.
It is most essential testing technique, because your role is to break stuff, right? So you will try to put invalid data, just try to break it. So when you try to test the same option using instead of number,
Letters.
you're gonna put a special character, anything like
Mm.
that, and try to see how it handle. That's
Mhm.
called negative testing. Make sense?
So in this testing, you can go beyond the requirements, right?
Yes, you can go anything to everything. They don't kind of limit your testing capability. I mean, you can do anything, because you're trying to break it, right? So once you break something, then probably gonna go back to the developer, and developer say, hey, this thing never gonna happen, why you are doing it. Then you're probably gonna talk to the business analyst or your product owner or TPO, whoever. Just to, they will give you the next step. They will say whether it needs to be fixed or whether it is a very rare case. So what you have to do, you have to just show them that it's not working based on this input. That's what you have to show them.
Mm.
Well, so the purpose of the negative testing is to push the software beyond its limit or something like that, right?
Yes, yes. Push the software beyond its limit and try to see how it handle with invalid input or invalid data.
Okay, makes
One is
sense.
valid, one is invalid.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it's also called break testing. So in interview, they can ask, can you tell me what is break testing? So then you have to say this is the negative testing. It uses the invalid data, which is not specified in the requirement. Like you have to say something like that. So the next one is called boundary testing.
Mm-hmm.
So let's kind of go back to the same one. So boundary testing. So you have a requirement, right? So let me kind of give an example of your phone number, right? How
Mm-hmm.
many digits are in your phone number? 10, right?
10 years.
So the requirement said that phone number has to be 10 digits or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you cannot have less than 10 digit or more than 10 digit, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
range is specific. That's the 10. It has to be one. I mean, it has to be 10 digit exactly, right?
Right.
That's the boundary. So when you make sure that you when you test something based on that specific digit or specific boundary is called boundary testing. Or another way of saying that, let's say that you have an application, right? You have an application, it only can handle number between 1 to 25, right? This is the range. So let's say that let me think about it. Let's kind of think about month. Every month has 30 days, right?
Mm.
So you cannot put more than 30, 31 or 32 because there is not option for it. So the limit is only 30 days. So when you test something based on the range, you can pick 3, you can pick 7, you can pick 8, within that 1 to 30, 31. So when you pick something based on this boundary value or based on these boundary settings, is called boundary testing. The requirement said that the let's say the customer should able to order something in any specific day of the month. Okay,
Mm.
so that's the requirement. Customer can able to order any product on any specific day of the month. So how are you gonna test that? So you say about any specific day. So you're gonna test with 25th of, let's say, September. You're gonna make sure that you can able to the customer can able to order on 25th September. You're also gonna check whether the customer can able to order on 21st or 5th. So you have the range. So the month is 30 days, right? So
Mm.
based on the range, you are kind of making sure that the order can be processed or complete. So when you kind of follow this type of technique, it's called boundary testing.
Mm.
So limit in the input field. So the limit is 1 to 30, and based on that, you are just kind of picking some random value. Make sense?
Mhm.
Bobby, you get it?
Yes.
Okay. Shabuz bhai, let me know if you're not getting it. I'll try to answer.
1 to 30 is only calendar when we put in the calendar. If like quantity or something like that.
Yeah, if the requirement say customer can only order 10 items at a
Mm,
time, right? So the
mm,
10 items mean the range is 1 to 10. So the customer can order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, in like 7 times or 10 times, right? So if the requirement say once he hit that 10 number, he should not able to order anymore. So your job is to make sure customer can able to order 6 times or 7 times, because that's the range.
range.
Okay, you just gonna focus on the range. It's not gonna think about beyond the range. You're gonna test based on the range that was specified in the requirement. So
Like the way we add our bio in Facebook, we can only have let's say 50 words, and that's our limit, right?
yeah, exactly.
Mm,
So now you're gonna only put 25 words. You're gonna make sure that you can put 25 words and still your bio can be saved or something,
Yeah.
right? Right.
Correct.
mm,
So
Right.
that's what it is.
Okay.
So system testing is called overall testing. So system testing is a very big word, but it's called overall testing. Means functional testing. So what is functional? Functional is integration, smoke, positive, negative, boundary. All are functional testing. So it fall under this category. Okay.
Mhm.
mm,
So another way of saying that, this functional testing is also a system testing. The structural testing is also called white box. The functional testing can be called system testing or black box testing. Make sense?
So in structural testing, they will test the actual structure, which is the code, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to test based on the code
Code,
structure.
yeah, right,
That's the structure.
right.
Functional based on the requirement,
Okay,
non-functional based on the performance.
okay.
mm,
So what is that? Yeah. So it is overall testing, which include functional integration. We already kind of gone over that. Backend, I'm gonna talk about those two in a moment. So when you do those type of testing, functional, positive, it's also going to include positive, negative, and boundary testing, by the way. So it includes all those functional testing that we kind of talk about so far. So when you include everything together and when you try to test, it's called system testing. When you use all those technique, positive, negative, boundary, integration, back end, front end, when you use all those different technique all together, it's called system testing. Make sense? It also called what? Black box.
Uh,
Look.
why-
Functional test.
So
black
functional.
boxes.
So
Oh,
I would say write that in your note. Functional testing, system testing, black box testing are same thing.
right.
They call it differently. But for your interview, if they say like what is system testing, don't get confused with system and black box because both are same.
Right.
So keep that in mind.
Mhm.
Structural testing. So the unit testing and white box testing are same as structural testing.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right.
And non-functional is the performance, which we'll come to it later.
Mhm.
So that's that. Any question on the system testing?
No.
So this is more like a regression. I mean, yeah, this is what you guys probably gonna spend more time in your in your real work. The reason is that, for example, so we can go back to this. You remember like how agile scrum methodology work? Once you work on something, they deploy that change to the production, right?
Right.
So same thing with that, what iterative.
Mhm.
Once they work on something, they push everything to the production, and
Right.
then they go to the next one and keep working on it.
Right.
So once they go to the next iteration or next sprint,
Mhm.
they have to make sure whatever stuff they built previously, like the iteration one or sprint one,
Mhm.
those are also working fine. Okay.
Mhm.
So they have to make sure that, because once they touch something, let's say you touch something, you're probably going to screw up something else that was done before, correct?
Right. Right.
So you have to make sure that whatever was done before is also working as it's supposed to be.
Okay.
So that's what it called regression testing. When you kind of follow this step, so when you kind of focus on making sure that whatever was working before also working now, when you kind of focus on those type of process, is called regression testing. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Pabi, are you clear? Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. So what is iterative? Iterative, you are basically working on something and then deploying it to the production, right?
Mhm.
You are working on something, the developer coded that, then they fixed it. I mean, then you tested that, then they deploy to the production. Once they
Mhm.
goes to the production, you go to the second iteration, right?
Mhm.
And then you're gonna do the same thing. Like in this case, what you have to make sure, whatever was done in iteration one, those are also working fine. Does it make sense?
Um,
So the thing is that if the iteration one is just the home option, right? So iteration one, they work on this module, home module. In
Mhm.
iteration two, they work on the course module. Okay.
Mhm.
So once they work on the home module, it goes to the production. Now they're working on the course module. So
Mhm.
now in the iteration two, you have to make sure that the home module is also working, because
Oh, okay.
that's already went to the production, went to the live. You also have to make sure that home module is working fine as well. So
Mhm.
when you perform this second level of testing like that, it's called regression testing.
is it some kind of
Okay, now got it.
is it some kind of maintenance for the previous sprint?
You are kind of right. It's not really maintenance. It's more like making sure that
Making sure.
whatever was there before
Mhm.
is still working fine and nothing gonna
Mhm.
impact that whatever you have done.
Okay.
So because
It's completely done.
yeah, because there probably some sort of relation between home and course. So let's say, like, if you just kind of focus on codes, but you didn't think about, like, in that other module that already deployed or already go to the production, if you don't think about, like, how it can impact, it would cause some issue, right? And
Right.
you want to make sure that you catches those things before it goes to the production, before this iteration to go to the production.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you have to make sure.
Okay.
So if there are some modification needs to be made in fixing the defect or adding enhancement, software QA analyst needs to retest the application and or functionality to ensure. This is a definition, okay? The
Mhm.
definition is saying, basically it is saying that, for example, uh, some software goes to production, and you found a defect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the maintenance, so I kind of talked about it before. Sometimes when we push the software or when we deploy everything, they probably can find some enhancement or some sort of issue in the software. Then they kind of go through that maintenance phase, right, to fix those issues or to resolve those issues. So when they resolve those issues, they also have to make sure that all other surrounding thing also working fine. So let's say Facebook, right? They deploy to production, or the application is moved to the production. Now the end user like us, we found some issue in the software. So what we're gonna do now, the Facebook will go back and fix that issue, and they will also make sure that all those other things that is working fine are still working fine.
Okay.
Correct. So that's called the regression. So that's what they're talking about here. Nothing is it's not gonna impact anything. When they try to fix something, it should not impact other things.
Mhm.
When you kind of follow that approach, it's called regression. So when this insecurity test case is called regression, let's say developer fix or modify any of the functionality, like I just kind of said that, right? When they try to fix something, you need to make sure that that particular functionality didn't affect or break down other functionality in the application. You have to make
Oh,
sure that it doesn't break other
Oh,
options.
no issue.
that makes sense.
Yeah, so that's what you have to make sure. And this approach called regression testing.
Mm.
So this is another book definition you need to know. You don't have to worry about how to do those. So there's two types of regression. One is called fixed, one is called risk.
Yes.
So fixed is once you modify and send back for test, that is fixed. So basically it's talking about once they fix something, once they fix some sort of defect or code, if you have to perform a regression testing, it's gonna fall under fixed. It's called regression fixed. So if any code or if there is a defect they found, and if they have to fix that defect, and now it came back to you for testing, this whole thing called regression fixed. And and the risk is once you do some further analysis, QA analyst, okay, so after you do the risk analysis of the critical functionalities of the application, QA analyst will perform retest the functionalities of that application. So this one is basically, in a plain simple word, let's say they are trying to deploy the second phase, right? They're trying to deploy this one
Mm.
in a second iteration. And as a QA analyst, you get some sort of analysis. Analysis means you're gonna, like, look into the option, and you're gonna say this option is probably going to impact this option. Like, there's something in here, it's probably gonna impact this.
Right.
So when you perform this type of analogy, when you perform this type of activity, is called regression risk. So my first example, whatever I tell you, like, when you deploy something here, when you work on something, you have to make sure that this module also working fine. This thing called regression risk. And the other one is called when they found a defect, and
Mm.
when they have to fix a defect and push that defect, and then you have to make sure that defect didn't break other things.
Mm.
That's called regression fixed.
Fixed.
Fixed and risked. So those are the two different types. Clear?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't want to hear saying like it's very, very difficult because you guys are saying it's you guys understand that, so it shouldn't be difficult. Now you guys have to like memorize that or maybe write that in your own words.
No, it's. I mean, I thought that it would be very hard, but it's when you were explaining them, it's getting easier actually.
Okay, that's good. Now you have to like write that in your own words, so that way it's gonna stays forever.
Right.
Um, so now they're like load testing, stress, volume, performance, and front end testing. So let me kind of focus on the front end for a minute. So front end testing is basically by making sure that front end application, like whatever you guys are seeing here, are
Mhm.
showing everything correctly. So what does it mean? So by looking at the front end, by looking at the website, if you see that logo here, the logo is showing up in the middle of the page, or maybe this option is showing on the corner. So the front end was kind of messy, or the front end was not really kind of looking good or looking cool. When you perform those type of testing, making sure the front end itself is looking good, that called front end testing, making sure all those
It's
small things.
basically verification, right?
Yes, verification. Yes, inspection. Based on what? Based on
Okay.
design
Right.
document.
Right.
Okay, so that's the front end application,
Okay.
front end testing. So the next is load testing. Okay,
Mhm.
so let's kind of go back to that example. When you guys were trying to apply in some specific website, it was not able to take your application. The reason is that it cannot able to handle that much load because there's so many users already
Yes.
logged into the application. Now it cannot able to load anymore. So
Mhm.
when you kind of try to see how many user or how much load an application can able to handle, is called load testing.
Okay.
Okay,
Mm.
simple. Always when you think about this definition, think about whatever you just told me today. I mean, think about it. You guys cannot able to log in. It takes 2 hours, 3 hours. Because why? Because there's so many people are trying to log into the application, and they're trying to do the same exact thing, and it cannot able to handle the load. When you try to perform this type of testing, it's called load testing.
So
Clear?
depends on software capacity when they limit the
Yeah,
users.
yeah. Yep.
Thing.
It will come from the requirement, or they will have some sort of architectural information which would
Right.
say it only can handle 100 user.
Mhm.
So that's something you will have to make sure. So again, in many companies, they have separate team who does that. You may not have to do anything. It's just for your understanding and for your interview purpose.
Right.
Stress testing is basically, so let's say an application can able to handle 100 user, right?
Mhm.
So but now you don't know what happened when 101 user try to log in. You don't know what's going to happen because it says I only can take 100 people. So if you put one more people on top of the 100 people, you have no idea how this application is going to react, right?
Right.
When you want to see how that application going to react when there is another user add on to it, that's called stress testing. Just
Mhm.
trying to make sure that how many user, like what happened when an additional transaction or additional user try to use that system. That's called stress testing. Make sense?
Yes.
The volume testing is, for example, you guys all, so volume testing think that way. So in this website is designed to handle 5 users in the same time. Okay. So more than 5 users try to log into this website, it cannot able to handle. It cannot able to um, process correctly. The volume testing is to make sure that how many user can log into the same time and how many user servers can handle at once. So basically, it's saying that so your application is on the server, right? The
Mm.
server can only able to take number of users. So if only can take 5 users, the volume testing is to make sure that it should only accept 5 user, and when there is 6 user is added, how is gonna react, or how is going to show the response to the user.
That's
When
kind
you
of similar with the load testing, right?
yes, people get confused. You are right. Load testing and volume testing is 95% same, but volume is talking about volume. How many users can log in into the same time? Okay, and this one is like going to take how much load a server can handle.
Oh, okay, okay.
When you talk about volume, if you just say that, it's talk about how many user can log into the same time or how many user server can handle at once. You know, it just
Volume testing is a specific number.
yes, it's not. I mean, it can be specific numbers or it can be like some sort of like some sort of like dynamic number. It can change. So let's say at 12 o'clock in the night time, the software only can take 10 users, but in the morning time it can take 200 users. Because
Mm.
at that time it was given less because there was less of traffic or less of people gonna log in. So that time it was less. So you have to make sure that when all those people try to log in into the same time, the application should perform correctly. That's what you have to make sure. All those 10 users, when they log in into the same time, it should able to handle correctly. But the load testing is like how much load it can handle. Like it probably can have like 100 people try to log in into the same time. So if your server gonna crash because there is 100 people try to log in into the same time, that's what you have to make sure in the load testing.
So what I have understood from here, based on load testing, they will limit, they will do the volume testing. So if they know how much load their software can handle,
Yes,
based
yes.
on that, they will
Mhm.
limit the user, right?
Yes, correct. Exactly, that's what's gonna happen. That's why the load and volume is almost same.
Right.
And sometimes they're probably gonna ask you like what is the volume or load testing? Volume or load? They're probably gonna ask in the same way. So you
Hmm.
can say like the load of the how much load the server can handle or how many concurrent user log in into the same time in the application.
Okay.
That's what it is.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Performance is everything. Whatever
Yeah.
we talk about load, stress, volume, it's called performance testing. So
Mhm.
once you combine all those three different elements,
Mhm.
it's called performance testing. Okay.
And how will the software work?
Yeah, yeah. You have to make sure that it passes in all those three different types. It
Right.
passes in load, it passes in stress. Maybe it didn't pass in the volume, then probably gonna have some issue in the performance.
Mhm.
When you kind of consider all those three, it's called performance testing.
Right.
Not only people, software also have a stress.
Yes, exactly. It all has stress. I mean, if you try, you can break stuff easily when you try to log in multiple users in the same time. It can break.
Right.
Okay. All right. Let me just kind of stop recording.